the German Climate Pavilion at COP29 in Baku. Germany. Climate solutions, fast and fair.
Good morning, everybody. Hello. Thanks for making time in your calendar, and also a very early good morning for those of you who are maybe joining us from Germany or from elsewhere in the world. Maybe you are already at your after-work cocktail when you go east, or you're very early at midnight. So thanks again for joining through the live stream. Ladies and gentlemen, again, we are here in the German Climate Pavilion. We have a full program. This morning we start with a topic of energy, as the energy sector, as we all know, is the biggest source of greenhouse gases worldwide. And when it comes to geographies, we do have, of course, a lot to talk about, because remote areas, island states, including and especially small island developing states, they face energy challenges of a tremendous amount due to their geographies, as I just mentioned, due to their limited infrastructure, and of course due to the vulnerability when it comes to climate change. How do we fix that? What solutions are on the table? What is needed to implement? We'd like to talk about opportunities, but as it is the COP of finance, every COP is a finance COP, but this COP especially is a finance COP, we need to talk, of course, how to mobilize the much needed investments. And with that, I welcome you once again. A note prior to our conversation, because here on stage we talk now about the decentralized or distributed renewable energy systems. They can range from different aspects and from standalone applications, for example, like solar lamps, or to the connection of takers in a mini-grid. And we will focus now on the latter in our next 60 minutes to see how these solutions can be implemented, how they really come into the local context and to the communities. So, as I mentioned, we will speak about opportunities, about finance, mobilization, and about technologies. And now we have experts from government, we have experts from the private sector and from the civil society here on stage. You can already see the seats here on stage. But we start with a technical input to really get along and on site. And the technical input is distributed by Irina, to an input about the distributed renewable energy systems. And with us is the Director for Country Engagement and Partnerships at the International Renewable Energy Agency. Please welcome him this morning. Gobus Gumul is with us. Thank you so much for making time, Gobus. The stage is all yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Many thanks for the government of Germany for organizing and giving us the opportunity to discuss this very critical topic of the sustainable and reliable energy supply to remote communities, island communities, through decentralized renewable energy. This topic is high importance for Irina, that in an area that we have been working for a long time, and it constitutes a very important part of our work, especially in connection with energy access. Ladies and gentlemen, today we confront significant global development challenges that impact a substantial portion of the world's population. And these challenges are primarily related to climate change, poverty alleviation, and socioeconomic disparities. A key issue is the lack of access to modern energy services, which severely affects the lives and livelihoods of low-income communities, particularly those in remote areas, in a disproportionate way. The latest tracking SDG 7 report indicates a concerning trend. 685 million people still do not have access to electricity, which is an increase of 10 million for the first time in a decade. The first time we see an increase in the number of people who don't have access. Furthermore, 2.1 billion people continue to use polluting fuels for cooking, posing serious health risks, especially to women and children. If the current rate of progress continues, millions will still be without electricity and clean cooking solutions by 2030, mostly living in remote and island settings. And this this is one side of the story. Besides those 685 million people without access to electricity, there are several million who have unreliable power, or the ones who rely on fossil fuel-based power generation, like diesel generators. And globally, the share of renewables or clean energy in the primary energy supply is just 19%. This is just to keep in mind. The farthest from access to affordable and modern energy are communities that are physically distanced from the supplying national grid. Living in inaccessible remote islands or mountain terrains, sparsely populated habitats, indigenous tribes with low power demand, or the populace displaced from their homeland due to conflicts and climate disasters. Their limited exposure to modern-day technologies is further augmented by poverty, and where it is affordable, the reliance is heavily on fossil fuels, such as diesel, as I mentioned. Approximately 12% of the global population lives in mountains. Small islands are home to 3%. An estimated 476 million people are indigenous, and 110 million are currently refugees and internally displaced populations. In most instances, decentralized renewable energy solutions, mainly mini-grids, have proven effective in delivering energy access to remote and underserved areas. Mountain countries such as Nepal and Mongolia are the top-ranking countries in their in electricity access rate from adopting decentralized renewable energy solutions, 11% and 8% respectively, and follow suit by island countries such as Fiji at 5%. Recognizing the need, IRENA, with support from the Government of Canada, launched an initiative at COP26 in Glasgow. It's named as Global Initiative on Transitioning Remote Communities to Renewable Energy, with a view to improving knowledge and promoting widespread use of decentralized renewable energy resources in remote and isolated communities to foster the energy transition. Under the first phase of the initiative, we have published a guidebook based on the 9 successful decentralized renewable energy projects across the globe. And it's called Successful Approaches to Transitioning Remote Communities Through Off-Grid Renewable Energy Solutions. And specifically, we looked into what are the key factors to make it happen, what are the key business models we implemented, and try to come up with a guidebook that of best practices for implementation elsewhere. And it highlighted, the guidebook highlighted the importance of developing enabling policies, providing support schemes, and ensuring regulatory support for remote communities electrification projects. For instance, in Mozambique, through the Energy Fund, they have adopted an aggregation and bundling approach. So it's a kind of an innovative approach, bringing together a number of mini-grids together and to make it more attractive for private investors, and they have been successful in doing that. Integrating energy access with productive applications such as agriculture and small businesses significantly enhance the socioeconomic benefits. And IRENA, through the Empowering Lives and Livelihoods initiative with renewables, we have launched it last year, and we have been working in 14 countries looking into solutions how to integrate renewables into health and agri-food value chains, and trying to identify key segments of the value chain where renewable energy component is important, and try to come up with a technical solution to be supported by financial solution and a capacity building component complementing the whole program. Equally important is the support the development of and adaptation of new technologies to local context to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of energy solutions. This also includes promoting knowledge exchange on innovative technologies across decentralized renewable energy and equipment from the global north to global south, but also south-south cooperation. We are looking on also a lot of opportunities. We also often see the need to mobilize affordable and tailored financing for end use and enterprises, including concessional loans, risk mitigation mechanisms for households, farmers, cooperatives, entrepreneurs, moving away from the only grant-based schemes that we often see in different countries. Raising capabilities at local stakeholders is key, because unless you have capacities on the ground, then the long-term sustainability of those programs and projects is at risk. And these are all local projects, and it has to be done by locals. So at the end, so you have to develop capacities with banking, with entrepreneurs, with all supply chains, and to have those capacities in place at the right time. The prospect towards a brighter energy future call for urgent and concerted actions to turn the tide and upscale our efforts to not only accelerate and expand energy access, but also improve reliability and decarbonize the energy sector across all communities. And I very much invite all parties, all stakeholders to join hands with us under this global initiative for transitioning remote communities to renewable energy, to have a stronger impact on the ground together, and to be able to make energy transition just and inclusive, putting people in the center of it, of our collective efforts. So just I would like to finish with an announcement that, in fact, this topic is very high on our agenda, and we are also organizing an event, in fact, later today, in the Canadian Pavilion, and I very much invite you to join us also in that event later today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gobus. We all know that the next event then to not miss out in the afternoon. Thanks for your technical input to start into our conversation. We will have two panels, ladies and gentlemen. One is more debating about the opportunities, and the other one is about the financial resources. May I introduce the first panelists here on stage, and I'll do the introduction here on stage. So please join me, Johan Vlasbart, Yema Lippe, Bill Hare, Olamide Nui-Afui, and Crispin D'Auvergne. Join me here on stage. Yes. Later on, we also have Joseph with us on stage for the second panel, but right now, I would be at the center. Yes. Join me here. Wonderful. Gender balanced. Excuse me. I needed to do, I had to do. No, standing up for the women. Nevertheless, it's lovely to have you. As I mentioned, we'd like to dive into the opportunities. I could do a quick round of introduction with you, Johan Vlasbart. Next to me, State Secretary at the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. Thank you. We have His Excellency Yema Lippe with us, a permanent representative of the Federated States of Micronesia to the United Nations. Thank you for making the time in your calendar as well. We have Bill Hare with us here in the center. Bill Hare is a climate scientist with 30 years experience in climate science and policy. He's also the founder and the CEO of Climate Analytics. We have Crispin D'Auvergne with us. You're serving as a climate change and disaster risk management coordinator with the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, and previously you worked with the government of St. Lucia in the fields of fisheries, natural resources, environment and energy, but also you are, as we all heard, a tough climate change negotiator for more than 15 years. So thanks for being here as well. And last but not least, we have Olamide Nui-Afui. Almost, right? Okay. You're the CEO, thank you. You're CEO of the African Minigrid Developers Association. Thank you for joining us as well. Please give the panelists a round of applause. Merci. Let's dive into the opportunities. We've heard the technical input already, so there is so much possible, but nevertheless, we are here at the German Climate Pavilion. Jochen, from a German government perspective, an estimated 47 million people worldwide are connected to mini-grids. 19,000 mini-grids are around. Why is the topic so relevant for the German government? And when it comes to the strategies in the German Development Corporation, where do you see the priorities when it comes to DREs?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Kati. Good morning, everybody. And I would have said the input we got from Gorbus was not just technical, it was highly political. Because it already brought all the facts to our attention, what it is about. And I would say the off-grid solutions and the mini-grid solutions are a kind of masterpiece of sustainable development, because they are connecting climate ambition, at the same time linking it with the imperative of energy for all. And this is changing the life of people, where they had no access to electricity, the access for kids to education, specifically girls to education, are not available, and opportunities of job creation, doing your own business, all this is very much linked to the availability of electricity. And either it is available in a non-sustainable way with diesel generators, also a strong link to the issue of health, as we all know, or it is not available at all. So this is kind of priority solution to bring access to energy to people and at the same time drive the climate ambition. And as this is so relevant, and as so many people in the world are living in remote areas or in island community, my ministry for a long time had a focus on that, and I'm looking here, Bärbel Höhn, she worked for the off-grid and decentralized solutions for a long, long time. A former minister in one of our regions, Bärbel, I wouldn't say North Rhine-Westphalia, not such a remote area, but still you were with full power and your heart behind this topic, and for very, very good reasons.
Thank you. Jemma, let's zoom in, because we heard a lot about opportunities. Your country is facing these unique challenges due, of course, to several reasons: geographies and geographic isolations, vulnerability to climate change. In the NDCs, Micronesia, when we look into the numbers, is aiming to reach a share of 70% renewable energy and electricity generation. So how can mini-grids really leverage the goal of Micronesia's decarbonization and these plans to really go forward? We talked about the opportunities and the possibilities, but how does it look like on the ground?
Thank you. Is it working? Yeah. Thank you very much.
A bit closer so we can hear you well.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very honored to be here, especially coming from a small island developing states in the Pacific. I feel a bit really nervous sitting among experts. I am no expert at all in the energy area, but I will try as much as possible to offer a few elementary answers to the issue that you had. Now, in Micronesia, and I think that's true throughout the whole of the Pacific, our island, there are some islands that are larger, and there are some islands that are very small. So for the largest communities, or larger communities or islands, there will need systems larger than mini-grids. But in these communities, solar energy will be the pathway from diesel electricity to decarbonize. Solar is not an access issue or a mini-grid issue, but it is a critical decarbonization issue. Now, second, when we talk about the somewhat smaller communities or the rural villages on the bigger islands, what we call in our islands villages, often the issue is access to some diesel electricity, because they are so isolated, but that's the big issue. So Minigrid will serve the community well and will be essential for decarbonization. Again, the move from diesel to clean energy, but not so necessarily for access to electricity, since they have diesel now. They have some diesel now. On the third one, we have smaller outer island communities. I come from one of those. So sorry,
what's needed? No, that's okay. But what's needed? You know, when you look on these three different perspectives.
Well, there's no, like I mentioned about the smaller ones, where I come, there is no diesel electricity at all, or use, because we're so far away, it's so difficult to access those. So one might consider solar installation as emissions avoided if you assume diesel would have been installed. But the main issue in these places is just the provision of access to electricity. And then finally, there is that some outer island communities that are very, very small, that may be too small to even have 4 mini-grids. So here again, the provision of the solar access and maybe emissions avoided, because there is no emitting system at all at the moment. Yes.
Well, thank you for zooming in with us into your live reality again, because, you know, we tend to forget sometimes what it really looks like on the ground and what it means to live so remotely. Thank you again for being here. Bill, from a scientific perspective, let's talk again about the opportunities and how to leverage these possibilities, how to really, you know, when we know these realities, what are key factors that we should consider to maximize the effectiveness of the DREs in really becoming distributed in every corner?
Yeah, thanks. And hello, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. I guess, you know, from the science or economic context, renewables, distributed renewables, battery storage are cheaper now than they've ever been. So a fundamentally different discussion than there was 10 years ago about that. But then what you see at the level of the grassroots, I guess, whether it's the Caribbean states or in some Pacific Island states, is we're bumping up against the barriers to introducing distributed renewable energy systems, and there's a lot of them. In the developed countries have barriers as well, but you have regulatory barriers, you have issues of finance and so on, which need to be overcome, which in our observation is one of the major impediments. It's not so much a technical issue now, but an issue of how do you actually overcome incumbency. How do you provide householders with access to the ability to generate, to feed back into the grid, to provide that security they need? And they're the softer issues that I see as the major challenges. I mean, preparing for your questions, I searched around our team working in the Caribbean and the Pacific, and actually in West Africa, because we're talking about SIDS, but a lot of the issues about DRE also apply in rural areas of Burkina Faso, Togo, Senegal, inland Senegal, and I presume also as well here Nigeria. So I think that's the key issue for me, is the implementation aspects, which are soft, but providing hard barriers now to implementation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We will look into different geographies in a second. Just allow me to be a little bit the devil here. Crispin, you know, critical voices, we can say, is it really needed to have such a small contribution, such a rather small contribution to climate change when it comes to DREs in remote areas? Nevertheless, the question, is it the big effect that we need for the big goal to change the entire planet, to make a difference in the entire planet? Is there a possibility, a good possibility for change when it comes to DREs implementation in rather remote areas as well?
Okay, thanks for the question and thanks for the opportunity to be here. A couple of things. First of all, yes, our emissions are very small as you know, from a global perspective, but we are among the most affected. And so if you look at our nationally determined contributions, we have fairly ambitious targets because among other things, we want to show leadership that it's affecting us. So even if our emissions are small, we want to show the world that we are prepared to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. And the other aspect of it is that it costs a lot. The fossil fuels, the importation is a serious drain on our economies because a lot of our money goes to paying for imported fuels. So energy security is another factor for us. A third aspect of the whole thing is vulnerability because we are affected by serious weather events, especially hurricanes, which are becoming more intense. And as a consequence, we believe that building resilience through renewables and using technologies like mini-grids, for example, helps us to ensure that after a hurricane that your whole system is not necessarily down, that hospitals and other critical facilities can continue to deliver life-saving care, etc., and that our schools can continue to run. And so photovoltaics, for example, solar is now a mature technology, and the opportunities are big, but there are challenges, as Bill mentioned, and we can probably talk about this some more.
Walking the talk, really, is in every corner. Thank you. Last but not least, Olamide is with us. Okay, we talked a lot about remote areas, small islands, but also, of course, rural areas when it comes now to different geographies. Rural areas on the African continent, they are also affected, right? They are also lacking a reliable energy grid, so DREs are really a possibility here as well. Again, when you listen to these to-dos and the needs, is there any difference right now, or do you have the same needs to include DREs into the grid, into the local communities, like we just heard?
Yeah, thank you very much, Katie, and a pleasure to be part of this diverse, gender-balanced panel. But I think the same challenges that remote islanded communities face are the same as like rural communities in the continent of Africa.
So you can join forces then, right?
Absolutely. It's and mini-grids and other distributed renewable energy sources or technologies are primarily positioned. I like the example that Crispin gave about climate resilience. So in my country, Nigeria, for example, we've had in the last 2 to 3 weeks or months, actually, we've had 3 grid collapses. And what happens is the entire system is shut down. With technologies like mini-grids, you can easily, they're localized, so you can easily isolate the areas that are affected, and they're more stable, sustainable energy solutions. This is not to dam the grid, because it's still important to have a centralized grid, but it's just to show what opportunities there are with mini-grids. Now, I'll give an example. When I took this job as CEO of AMDA, one of the first things I did was I went, into some of the most remote parts of my country and in Kenya as well. And that was the first time I understood what it meant to be off-grid, because I saw parts of the sorry.
I think we can hear you well.
Yeah.
Do you hear yourself?
Yeah, okay.
That's fine.
I saw parts of the continent where there was life beyond the grid, but no light beyond the grid. So I actually saw the last pole. And then for 2 hours straight, there was absolutely no grid infrastructure. And so we went into this farm. It's called Dobi Farms. It's in the outskirts of the capital city, Abuja. It's 2 hours away from the closest grid infrastructure. And initially, they were powering their farms and their greenhouses and irrigation systems with diesel. The moment they changed to a mini-grid, it saved them about 40% of their operating costs. They were able to power the homes of their staff and also send some residual power to the neighboring communities. So that shows you what is possible.
But is that the question to make it, for business cases? Is that the aim for it to really make a business case out of it as well, because it's saving costs in the end for companies,
There
right?
has to be some level of business case. What I always say is, people who are going to the most remote parts of the continent, they need to have an incentive. Now, you can't necessarily, it can't just be a business incentive. It can't just be a business motivation. But you need to have an incentive to take power that far off the grid or to some island communities. So there has to be some level of commercial in commercial sense in taking building this infrastructure.
Yeah. Crispin, in regards to that, how do we design then the right implementation for the people? What is needed for the design process when it comes to include a business case for it as well?
Well, before I move on, just to answer the question specifically, I want to indicate that in the Caribbean, especially in the Eastern Caribbean, we have some of the highest energy prices in the world. We are somewhere in the region of maybe between 4 and 6 times more expensive in the Eastern Caribbean for a kilowatt of energy, a kilowatt hour, than say, for example, the US. Okay, so we're talking 35 cents US for 1 kilowatt hour. All right, so that is a kind of ballpark. So the business case is right there, right? If you're able to bring it down to, because 7, 8, 9, 10 cents, that's for us. That's a significant saving. It has implications for businesses, manufacturing, etc. So I think it's really a question. In terms of the business case, like I said, it's self-obvious, and how it's structured would depend on on the particular needs of either the country or the community or the sector where it's being designed. So there's not a one size fits all, but it would vary according to the needs.
Again, that brings me, of course, to you, Jochen. How do we bring in these perspectives when it comes to development cooperation to foster a just energy transition, to foster a design for the people? And how do we include these needs when it comes to designing projects and cooperation?
Yes, we are doing it in many parts of the world in our development cooperation. Just let me start with one country which is definitely not a small island country. I'm talking about Indonesia, but it has many, many small islands, 17,000. And of course, it's extremely relevant for such a country. And if I would put myself in the shoes of a politician in Indonesia, you have to take care also about people in remote areas. Otherwise, the peace in your country will collapse. You cannot just focus on the big cities. And therefore, we are supporting the 1,000 Island program of Indonesia, providing renewable electricity to people. And we do it also in other areas, such as in Mali, and as part of the Clean Energy and Energy Inclusion in Africa Foundation, CEI. Through this we can provide electricity, again, specifically, if I'm now talking about Africa, to young people and to women. One of the most frightening numbers I learned in my job in the Ministry for Development is that in Africa we need 25 million additional jobs every year for the young generation. And if we don't provide access also to remote areas, this will not happen. They cannot start their own business, taking their own lives in their hand. And if I may conclude with one thought about mini-grids. I mean, you are far more experienced than me on that, but we started all this business or all this support with provisions for single households with renewable electricity, let's say a PV panel. and that's fine. But we can go beyond it, and that's a mini-grid approach. You can make much more use of installing mini-grids to level the demand at different sites, at different times, and in different households. And also when you add a small business and let's say mini industries to that, mini-grids are extremely important. Then you can't do it just with household-to-household electricity provision.
Bill, I'd like to come in with you, of course, with a scientific perspective when it comes to strategies coming out of the research area. The economic aspect, where we just talked about making out a business case, designing it just, this transition just and inclusive for a lot of communities, for different groups. How and what do we have to look into more and more to really give this, what we discussed here, another fundamental basement from a scientific perspective, especially creating out a business case of it, seeing the economic value of implementing DREs more and more?
Thanks. I think I just focus on the lessons that we're taking away from the work in the Caribbean, because it's relevant to your question. And it's not just about money, it's about the whole implementation architecture, which means the finance, the risk assessments, who's putting in capital in. So, in the small island states, the system runs on highly centralised but small grid systems. And then those grid systems are often financed or invested by foreign partners, and the investment decisions are made external to the countries. They're not necessarily made, they're made on the basis of who is willing to invest given the regulatory environment. So what that leads to is a situation where the renewable capacity being installed is not transformative because of risk aversion or because of regulatory constraints, that is, who owns the system. And unfortunately, these cluster of issues are resulting in the installation of LNG capacity, liquefied natural gas capacity in the Caribbean, to feed into baseload, inverted commas, baseload gas, crowding out and curtailing renewable energy. So this is the heart of the implementation architecture problem of actually looking at the whole system, because the consequence, and partly is what Crispin referred to, is the consequence is you end up with very high electricity prices. Households start to complain, governments have to subsidise, and it becomes a bit of a political problem as well. And you get serious lock-in of very expensive infrastructure. So that is the challenge that we see emerging, where you can calculate that it's actually much more cost-effective to do a distributed renewable energy system with battery and storage for households paying bills, but the consequence of the regulatory and larger environment is perverse in that sense. So that's a bigger picture problem that requires a lot of architectural issues to solve, I think.
So, Christmas is around the corner. To change that, what would be your top priority coming to financing DREs? And that we can also discuss in our second panel, as the top priority in mobilizing the finance architecture for DREs.
Well, I think a broader approach to finance needs to be taken beyond the project-by-project assessment, because the project-by-project assessment contributes to the problem that I'm just talking about, right? So I think a larger approach needs to be taken to assist governments in establishing the policy frameworks, in being able to work out how to roll out distributed renewable systems to difficult environments, and to overcoming the financial barriers to the foreign investment already made in grids. And that involves money, and there are some positive examples in the Caribbean. I mean, Grenada's sorted out its power utility, etc. But these are generic issues that we're observing real time now in the Caribbean.
Thank you. All right, I'm a little bit of timekeeper here as well. Unfortunately, Jochen Flassbart and Bill Hare, you have to leave for your next, appointment now, or our next event. Thank you for talking with us about the opportunities. We will stay. No, don't leave. You're more than invited to stay with us when we talk about the financial possibilities and what Bill was just mentioning. How do we really bring life into the mobilization of more funding? Nevertheless, thank you to Bill Hare and Jochen Flassbart for being here with us for this first round. This is your round of applause. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. The others are staying with me on stage. Thank you. Bill and Jochen, have a successful day, and you're always welcome here at the German Climate Pavilion. I would say we have the best coffee anyway on COP. You agree? Wonderful. Thank you. We will, of course, be joined later in a second by Joseph. Nevertheless, before we start, let's stay here and let's hear another technical input by Get Invest on really our topic now, on financing opportunities for DRE. Alexander Huppertz will be joining us virtually, and I hope you can hear me well. He is the head of steering and mobilization at Get Invest and following several roles at the GIZ. Alexander, greetings from Baku.
Thank you, Kati, and good morning, everyone in Baku.
Thank you, Alexander. Just a quick note: we need a little bit more volume, I guess, on stage to hear you well, just for our staff in the back. But with that, the floor, absolutely, the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you, Kati. Thank you. First of all, I would like to start by thanking the BMZ for the opportunity to address you here today during this important session. And my apologies for not being there in person with you, but this being now the German winter here in Bonn, I have caught quite the nasty cold and was unable to travel. But I'm glad to still be here and present this morning. If I could ask the colleagues in the background to bring up the presentation that we previously shared. All right, just waiting for the first slide to arrive here. If you could go to the title slide, there we go. Okay, thank you very much. As we have limited time this morning, I was told I've got about 10 minutes, and talking about financing challenges surrounding micro and mini grids in 10 minutes is a challenge. So let us delve right in. Some of you might be wondering what Get Invest actually is, what we do, and why Get Invest is speaking here today on the topic of financing for mini grids. So bear with me and allow me to spend a minute or two on giving you an intro. If we could move to the next slide, please. Access to finance, as we've also heard just now in the panel, remains a major challenge for private sector players in clean energy in partner countries in general, but also for mini and microgrids in particular. This is true both when it comes to the variations in procedures and requirements of financiers, so how do I get a certain financing, as well as with regard to the sheer evolving landscape of instruments and funds. And you can see here on the slide that we are operating also a funding database of instruments that are of relevance for the private sector in clean energy projects in partner countries. And we have over 240 entries in that database. No private sector player can be expected to fully grasp, understand, and manage that landscape. To answer this challenge, BMZ, the European Commission, as well as Norway, Sweden, the Netherlands, and Austria have funded Get Invest to provide hands-on support to private sector in accessing finance. For that, Get Invest has developed an open, on-demand facility where projects and companies have access to advisory services that make them ready for financing and directly link them with financiers from Europe and beyond. Acting as an honest broker, our experts often support clients all the way through to financial close and through the transaction phase. So that is at the heart of what we do, making people ready for finance. Complementing this work, Get Invest also cooperates very closely with relevant industry associations, organizing joint events, matchmakings, and similar things. We've, for example, worked in the past a lot with Olamide and the Africa Minigrids Developer Association. We are good friends with Crispin and the OECS in the Caribbean, with whom we've also collaborated very closely in the past. I've already mentioned the funding database here. We also support the data platform Prospect, which would merit its own 15-minute presentation. I don't want to delve into this now, but we will share the presentation later on, and the link is here so you can read up on your own what that is for an interesting tool. We've also developed a new service providing capacity building to local banks on clean energy, local currency financing. And that is, in our view, a very critical thing to do because especially local currency financing has a lot of potential to close the financing gap that we are seeing. In sum, Get Invest is a global technical assistance program covering Sub-Saharan Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. It's implemented by GIZ and part of the larger Get Pro program. Next slide, please. I have already mentioned our advisory services before, so I do not want to spend a lot of time on the details here, but just to highlight that we are currently running separate instruments. And I also wanted to give a few numbers here to highlight our traction in the market. Since our inception in 2016, we have supported by now over 500 individual clients and are currently providing advisory services to over 230 individual projects and clients, which are representing an investment pipeline of roughly 5.5 billion euros, the vast majority of which are operating in Sub-Saharan Africa. So far, we've managed to successfully introduce over 200 clients to suitable financiers, and many of those are currently in negotiations with these financiers. Over 100, as of last week, where we've reached the 100 mark, have by now reached financial close, representing almost $500 million in investment that have been secured already. Substantially more information on what Get Invest does, our results, and how we operate can be found in our results deck, which is also linked here on the presentation, but can be easily found on our website. So, without much further ado, let's move on to the topic of the day, mini-grids and related financing questions. If we could move to the next slide. To start with, this is just a quick snapshot of our mini-grid portfolio in Sub-Saharan Africa. It could just as well be translated to the Pacific or to Caribbean island states. The challenges are very similar, whether it's a very remote community in Sub-Sahara or a remote island state. While not fully representative, this gives a good idea of the lay of the land. And two things I want to highlight in particular. You will see on the map that the distribution of clients is very uneven, with Nigeria clearly standing out and Eastern Africa being another cluster. This is naturally partly a reflection of our past mobilization efforts, but it also is a reflection of the market conditions in these regions. Especially Nigeria has made substantial advances in regulatory reform for mini-grids. Also, AMDA and Olamide's team have been essential here, but also the German EU co-funded Nigeria Energy Support Program has over the last 8 years done tremendous work in driving this, and we can see it in the application for support, that if the regulatory framework improves and enhances, private sector actually steps up and starts to develop more intensely. Next slide, please. This is actually probably the key slide for today. What you see here is our portfolio of our current and past mini-grid clients and the funding amounts that they have sought. As you can see, the vast majority of clients is looking for deals below 20 million euros. So you can see on the very left, these are about 20 plus clients are looking for less than 2 million euros. About 15 of the clients we have are looking for something between 2 and 5 million, and about 25 are looking for 5 to 20 million. And less than 10 are looking for more than 20. And that is already, I think, the main thing that needs to be recognized, and that is that it is an early market. It is an early stage market. Actually, both of these aspects, the uneven distribution and also the amount of financing thought, are very indicative of the fact that this is an early stage market. In fact, we've only started 15 years ago. It's very new still. If we want to reach its full potential, then the scale still needs to be built. In order to achieve the targets, the private sector needs to operate at a much larger scale than right now. And for that, we need the right financing. Next slide, please. Now, what have we learned over the last 8 years in operation and working with all of these companies and trying to find financing for them and get them ready for it? One of the things is that newly founded companies are in principle climbing the same financing ladder in terms of instruments. Everybody starts with seed capital and grants and then transitions into early stage equity before they at some point down the road are able to access actually DFI funds and senior debt and large ticket sizes. However, especially on the equity instruments, there is at the moment an alarming shortage that puts many companies currently at risk as they are leveraged with a lot of debt and they struggle to find the matching equity for the next growth stage. And additionally, the absence of local currency is actually compounding that a lot more because that would also be the role of local currency financing in other markets. In Europe, a lot of these financial transactions would be done by local smaller banks. That is not the case in Africa for the time being, and also in small island states. Well, one might say now, okay, but if this is so challenging, why don't we focus on 1 to 3 very big players that are able to absorb large tickets of late stage finance and go through that? Well, we believe that this is not a good idea for various reasons. And you can see it here on the right side of the slide. Resilient, innovative, and sustainable market structures need players on all levels, from the very big ones to the small, very locally rooted ones. Otherwise, there is the risk of lacking local value addition. And we've already heard it in the panel just now that this should be an effort that also benefits the local partners, local value addition, job creation, these things. And that can only be done by a very broad-based and diverse market structure and not by 3-4 international big players. It is therefore important to develop matching financing solutions for the different layers of the market. Otherwise, the markets will develop distortions. But what is the issue with matching finance exactly, you may ask? So if we go to the next slide, let me highlight that aspect very briefly. And Kati, don't worry, I'm almost done. I'll keep to my 10 minutes. We've made the effort of mapping out the landscape of all the funding instruments as we can currently see them. And you can see the logo clouds here on the right, separated out for equity and debt investments. And there's a clear gap in equity investments and in instruments covering early to middle stage project and businesses. And while you still see several icons in these bubbles, many of those are actually already kept out. So all the financing that they have available has been distributed, and others are already being closed down because additional finance is not being available. In terms of debt instruments, the situation is somewhat better. But while there are more players in the respective stages, their firepower in terms of available funding varies strongly, and the majority of the available funding still resides with the very large development banks servicing the late stage, large-scale projects, and not the majority of the very dynamic and currently really also growing early to mid-stage markets. In sum, if we could go to the last slide, please, sorry. In sum, mini-grids are a key element of the energy solution mix. There's no question about this. IEA estimates that over 65% of all the connections that lie beyond 20 miles of the grid will ultimately come from mini-grids. 65+%, that's a lot. There is a diverse private sector in many countries. It has grown over the last 10 years, and innovative financing structures such as, for example, asset co-approaches are being developed and successfully deployed. But many, in principle, solid and viable companies are currently unable to raise the capital that they need to grow. And that leads right now to a slowed down project development and less impact on the ground than is needed. But the solutions are known, they need deployment, political initiatives need to translate into what the market needs. And we've already heard, for example, about the CEI Africa Foundation, which is one of the very positive examples of a very effective equity instrument in the market. And we certainly need more of that. Lastly, There's also new momentum through initiatives such as the M300 and the World Bank Ascent program. I think Joseph will speak about this in a moment when he represents GEAP on the panel. But the challenges are there. The solutions are known. Now we need to go and get to tackle them, and Get Invest is certainly here to play its role and support this process. And with this, thank you for your attention, and I wish you a fruitful and productive panel discussion. And I will certainly listen in because the first one was already very interesting. Thank you so much, and back to you, Kati.
Thank you, Alexander. And for all of you with questions, just take a photograph of his. Yes, we have to redo the last slide because some of you were not quick enough for taking a photograph. So please, to my team behind the scenes, can we get the last slide again, because some people here from the audience still wants to take a photograph. Nevertheless, we send the PPT also around if you're interested. Okay, all done? All done. Thanks for joining again, and to all the new faces here, welcome in the German Climate Pavilion. We talked already about the opportunities. Now we got into some mechanisms that are relevant for mobilizing the much needed finance. With us now, as new panel guest, I warmly welcome you here on stage, is Joseph Nganga. I hope I did the click enough correctly. I'm still trying. You are the Vice President for Africa of the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, and you have a background actually in investment banking. You co-founded the Renewable Energy Ventures. So when it comes about money, we need to talk. We need to dive into, and the GEAP has announced a target of $30 billion flowing towards distributed renewable energies by 2030. That means supplying 180 million people with sustainable energy. So how do we meet these goals? And of course, in the end, how do we ensure not just the financial viability, but also the sustainability in this whole process and in designing the right cooperation? Joseph, let's talk money.
Thank you very much. And how much time do we have? Those are very many questions. But in summary, I will start with the basics on mini-grids themselves. I think we have spent a lot of time piloting, figuring out technologies, so there's no more need to say whether solar works, batteries work, and so on. We are now at the situation where we're talking about business models, and business models that can scale. From my perspective, I think investors need not only to invest on the supply side, but they must also invest on the demand side. If you're going to look at a mini-grid or a portfolio of mini-grids, you must not just think about how many connections you're going to have. You must think about how many kilowatt hours are going to flow, at what price, and who's going to buy those, and how are you going to invest on that side so that you have a holistic business. The issue of subsidies for the connection part is very good, but it drives an incentive that is lopsided. It allows for many connections, but kills the sustainability of the mini-grids. So number one, from an investment perspective, investors need to switch from just being electron suppliers to solution providers, which includes the supply side and the demand side. And then we raise that a little more and speak to Mission 300, which is the $30 billion commitment by African Development Bank and the World Bank to connect 300 million Africans by 2030. That is public money. Part of it, we think, half of that will go through grid extension, and half of it will be through DREs. DREs include standalone solar, it includes mini-grids, and it includes solar home systems. The way this is going to work is a lot of that money is public funding. That public funding will go towards connection subsidies and other public solutions. It must unlock private sector investment. And this is where it is really critical to get the business models right. Because if that money goes towards solutions for connection, but does not lead to sustainability, the countries will be stranded with the debt. This 30 billion is loans to governments. And the communities won't have long-term sustainability. sustainable power. So what is the solution for proper financing? Again, ensuring there's enough supply and demand, and ensuring that there's scale. One of the things we've seen is we pay 10 times more for solar panels, for batteries, than Asia or India because of the scale of equipment we bring into the region. So number one is we must have solutions for scale, and at GIAP, we have what we call aggregated procurement. So we help a series of developers, each of them place their order, we prepay for it, they get it at their port, and that reduces the cost. The second is ensuring that you marry demand with supply. And at GIAP, we've piloted with RARE in Nigeria how you can design mini-grids, not just for the supply side, but also what solutions are they going to use that electricity for? Rice milling and so on. So that's the next stage of ensuring we have adequate funding. And then I'll conclude by saying that in order for this to be at the scale and the pace we need several solutions. We need local developers driving mini-grids. If you look at one of the challenges with the largest mini-grid companies, it's that they have very high overheads. Why? Because they're immediately international companies that must pay international salaries, that have to live in a certain part of the country, and so on. But if you take this as a local business, the cost of an employee is, you take the cost of the international actor, you remove 1-0. What does that do for economics of these projects? It improves them tremendously. So we must be prepared to support the local developers so that, one, the systems are affordable, two, the capacity remains in country and they can scale because they have the capacity, they have the assets, and they're local, and three, they can align very closely with the policies and regulations in that country. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. I know it's been a tough question. It's maybe $1 trillion question in these contexts of COP. Before I come to the demand side, Yema, I'd like to ask you again, of course, bring in the local perspective again. How do we, and Alexander was mentioning matchmaking, different levels, and of course matchmaking also with the local communities and the different initiatives. So from your perspective, what is needed when it comes to different investments, and how to include, in the end, the people in the process, not just from an investment side, but also really thinking again to the context that you were giving us at the beginning of the context of the ground? I think it's switched on already.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah. Thank you. Financing is always an important issue. And the last presenter talked about equity. And I think that's the big issue here. Because you have companies that are willing to come in and install, let's say solar, but then they don't leave the community with, having some ownership in there. So you solve the issue of emissions and access with solar, but the community, the cost, you're still paying, like you're paying things from outside because you don't own it. So I think an important part of it is to have, we hope that we would have some partnership that would lead to some ownership, at least over time. You live with the communities with that ownership, because without it, it's like you're still paying for the diesel like we imported, and this is a really big issue. So hopefully that issue of domestic equity could be addressed.
Thank you. Crispin, I'd like to come back to you because, of course, Bill also mentioned earlier different financial mechanisms that are needed. And I'd love to come back to you when it comes to cooperation in the topic of mobilizing finance and funds and investments. From your perspective, we are in this world where a lot of nations are disruptive in working together, and multilateralism is really under threat in some regards. But when it comes to cooperation, your organization and your daily work is really bring people and mechanisms together. What is something that you would like to address when it comes to matchmaking different funds, when it comes to matchmaking the right people for financing DREs in a sustainable and just way?
That's a question with many different aspects, to it. It's a multifaceted question. But let me say quickly that the OECS, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, is an 11-member grouping of countries in the Eastern Caribbean, comprising 6 independent countries, 3 UK overseas territories, and 2 French territories. And so we have a mix of governance and political structures in the different countries. But the OECS is really dedicated to regional integration and free movement of people, goods, and services. And what I can say is that in the independent countries, such as mine, St. Lucia and Dominica and so on, people can move and work freely. They can go from each independent country, including Montserrat, which is a British territory. They can stay indefinitely, work indefinitely, no need for work permit, etc., which has implications for one of the issues of capacity, which if you need the skills to do the renewable energy installations, and if there's a surplus of skills in one country and so on. I say this just to provide a background, because the whole idea of a regional approach and collaboration between countries, I had to give that kind of context, because you see, for a great part of the last couple of decades, in fact, historically, small islands have been ignored when it comes to investment in renewables, because the feeling is that the markets are too small to yield any kind of significant, returns by investors. So apart from a small grant here or a utility-funded investment there, we've kind of been ignored when it comes to the large investments. So we see the potential for bundling more than one country coming together and creating enough of a critical mass to attract the kind of investment that we want. So that is one aspect of things. It also has, and Joseph, you spoke about the whole idea of procurement. We call it in the OECS pooled procurement. We have a long history of doing it with pharmaceuticals, for example, where we're actually able to bring in pharmaceuticals at significantly reduced prices and distribute them to our islands. We're now looking at the whole issue of expanding that procurement to include renewables, and in fact, we're about to start doing that under a World Bank funded project, which is going to kick off in a number of Caribbean countries. So, which will help to bring the price down. So, the other thing that we're also working on is the whole issue of policy and regulation. So, because in some countries, you have situations where the utility is guaranteed to make a profit, so to speak, where they have a guarantee, they have a what you call a holiday of 60 to 75 years, of monopoly and so on. That doesn't always augur well, usually doesn't augur well for the kind of investment you want in renewables, and it has implications, and in fact, one of the things that the utilities like to say is that, they complain about grid stability or instability. If you bring in too much renewables at a time, the grid is going to collapse. So we're about to embark on a photovoltaic capacity, hosting capacity study to look and see for each island, of the eligible islands, what capacity we can, what they can meaningfully take, and in other words, how much renewables they can absorb, without compromising grid stability, and then that is going to have implications for how much investment can happen. So these are some of the things that we're doing together, and then also the idea is also to come up with some initiatives where we can approach partners, jointly and say, look, this is what we want. It is not you telling us what you're going to do. This is what we want, and then and this is how we need to structure it to make sure that it's you get your return on your investment, but it also leaves something that for us that is sustainable. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for drawing the picture and for making it understandable. Because coming from the geographies of small islands now to rural areas on the African continent, I would like to hear from you, Olamide, what financing models or partnerships have been successful? What can you share with us as a lessons learned? But also, and I know it's also a difficult question, where do you see room for improvement? Where is a pain point where you'd like to draw our attention to?
That's an excellent question. What I would do is I'll probably start with the last question the pain points. So there's a report by the African Development Bank and I believe the International Energy Agency that says about 33%, so only 3% of global investments in energy comes to Africa and 2% in clean energy. So I think that number should sort of resonate with us, which is the pain point. So what is happening is that we're doing quite a lot of small things and not consolidating and doing big things. So it seems like there's a lot of activity, but we're just scratching the surface.
But is it a lack of communication, of working together, or what's the lack of it?
It can't. We just need more funding. There's so much. So the size of the problem is this. So if I use the World Bank's numbers, for us to achieve real universal access to electricity, we need at least 160,000 mini-grids, which would solve about, give or take, 56 to 60% of the energy access problem, considering that most of our continent, especially, let me speak for Nigeria. Today, Nigeria has 220 million people, and about 80 to 90 million people do not have access to reliable electricity. And most of these parts of Africa, or in my country specifically, are beyond the grid. Actually, no grid infrastructure whatsoever. Now, you can invest in grid extension, which is always an option, but in some parts of this, in some of these areas, a mini grid or other distributed renewable energy solutions like solar home systems, like we're seeing the emergence of mesh grids, which have been quite successful in countries like Haiti. What the investment needs to achieve universal access in Africa is about 91 billion. Today we probably only seen about maybe 7 billion. And if our target is 2030, we're very much lagging behind. So we just need more money coming in and faster.
Joseph, is that, well, one of the answers of very difficult questions? We need more finance, more money, or is there a different layer to that answer as well from your regard, Joseph?
We need more money, period. And then you ask, where does our money come from? Europe subsidizes electricity consumers at 200 billion a year based on 2022 numbers. The fossil fuel industry is significantly subsidized. Africa needs the right climate finance that takes away the subsidies from those who don't need it and gives it to those who do. Why do that when those subsidies are from those countries' taxpayers? Because from a climate perspective, if we don't do this, Africa is going to electrify with fossil fuels. And so we are going to be, as a world, in trouble collectively. So I think number one is a mindset shift. Ignoring rural people because they're not visible is a very dangerous thing. So number one is a quantum of money, and where will it come from? Take away subsidies, allocate them where they have the biggest climate impact. So we need to have a real conversation around climate finance as a collective. Number two is African governments have a huge responsibility. Investors are very predictable. They want policy regulatory predictability. They want clarity on processes. They don't want to visit 20 offices to get permits for one mini-grid. So our governments have a significant responsibility to deliver for their people by making it easy for the funding to flow. Because even if we unlock all of it, but it doesn't flow, we still haven't solved the problem. Mm-hmm. I'm going to stop. I could talk all day, but I'm going to stop.
I'd like to respect your calendar, so Olamide, 2 sentences, and then we need to wrap up because I respect your time and your calendars. I know, but please,
Just wanted to add, practical example of a solution that is working, or that
In 2 sentences now.
There's an
I'm
organization called InfraCredits that has created a blended finance facility that brings concessional financing with commercial capital. And that's what that has done is it's enabled companies, like some of the companies that that was in the presentation, to scale, to achieve scale. So we need more of those facilities. I believe there's one that was created recently called Damana, similar to InfraCredit, based in East Africa, that will be doing. So we need more of that. We need more funding coming to create blended finance solutions for Africa. Thank you.
Can we have another panel on another time, please? I would love to dive in with you again into this topic. Yes, is that a deal? I wish you so much success on these hard conversations here at COP29. Thanks again for being here. Thank you so much. And this is your round of applause to the panelists. Merci beaucoup. And for you for joining us, thanks again. Now it's time for another coffee. We are diving into the coffee break, and I wish you a successful rest of the day. Join us here at the German Climate Pavilion.
Done this before. It says international moderator, so you're a pro.
Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP29 in Baku. Germany. Climate solutions, fast and fair.